I start the recording mark because I occasionally forget.
Yeah, I do the same.
Gabriel, Katrina, can you hear me? Okay.
Yes, we can hear you,
Okay.
Tyson.
Okay. Great. Thanks.
Tyson, let's give this just a few minutes. People are still checking in.
Trickling in. Okay. Sounds good. Gabe, I'm happy to start and people can uh trickle in. Uh, so thank you all for coming out, or I guess should I say online, for this Ruskin Art Club event. My name, as you could tell from my Zoom handle, my name's Tyson Gaskill, and I am the current president of this organization, which is Southern California's oldest social club and has been in existence since 1888. I'm going to apologize for my somewhat rushed and abbreviated welcome here. I literally just stepped in the door from our graduation or commencement activities in the libraries at the University of Southern California campus, which is where I work my day job. But it's always a fun time of year to be part of the academic terrain. So now our namesake British polymath, John Ruskin. Sorry about that. Cat get always interrupts my Zooms. Uh, John Ruskin was an accomplished art and architectural critic. He famously said, when asked if he contradicted himself, that he contained multitudes. And today we're happy to welcome a speaker who will be touching on some of those multitudes, and I think may weave together some of Ruskin's views on political economy and ecology. I very much look forward to reading his new book. But to formally introduce our speaker and say a bit more about the book and its ties to Ruskin, I'd like to welcome our executive director, Gabriel Meyer. He is a poet journalist and an award-winning foreign correspondent who has written more than a few words about Ruskin and his relevance to our world today. So, Gabriel, please take it away.
Thank you, Tyson. Delighted to be here tonight. Welcome to our another in our series of lectures. Our speaker tonight is Mark Usher. I first, I think, met Mark, at least semi-officially, at the General Assembly of the Guild of St. George, Ruskin's own charity, founded in 1871, at the annual meeting, and Mark gave a talk there, and I was determined that we would see what we could do to lure him into our series, and we succeeded, and we're very grateful. Mark is the Lyman Roberts Professor of Classical Language and Literature and a member of the Department of Geography and Geosciences, the Environmental Program, and the Food Systems Graduate Program at the University of Vermont, and, as I mentioned earlier, a companion with myself in the Guild of St. George. His latest book, Following Nature's Lead, Ancient Ways of Living in a Dying World, has just been published by Princeton University Press, and more about that later on in the afternoon. His previous books include Plato's Pigs and Other Ruminations, Ancient Guides to Living with Nature, and 3 books in Princeton's Ancient Wisdom for Modern Readers series, including How to Care About Animals, How to Say No, and How to Be a Farmer. Usher and his wife own and operate a farm in Shoreham, Vermont. So Mr. Usher also contains multitudes. And we invite him to share that with us tonight. Thank you, Mark.
Well, thank you. It's great to be here, and it's great to have an audience. I didn't count, but it looks like, a dozen, baker's dozen, including me. So thank you for coming out and for listening to this. Now, I thought I contain multitudes as Walt Whitman, but I could be wrong about that. Maybe Whitman got it. Maybe Whitman got it from Ruskin. But anyway, Ed Young wrote a great book with that title. Also, if you haven't read it, you should see it. All right, I'm going to try to now share my screen quickly and give you a very brief. Did it work? Okay. Has that worked? Yes, it has worked. Okay. And then slideshow, play from start. Okay. Okay, you know all that. You don't have to see that. So here is a cartoon from the New Yorker that is on my office door at UVM. And I think anybody who's written a book can probably relate. Here is the author, you know, the celeb, and on the sidewalk is a hat, and he's begging for an audience, as perhaps I'm begging here. I'm going to be telling you about talking about material from the book that has just been published. This is an adapted version of that. So if you like or hate what you hear, there's more of it in the book. It's the 4th chapter. That's the book. That's the cover. You may have seen that in the advertisement. And I wanted to start out with this idea of upcycling. And I know we have Claudio. You are from Brazil, and you probably know this artist. This is well, not the one on my left, but the one on the right. The one on the left, of course, is Caravaggio, Eros or Amor, and on the right is a version of this great work by Vic Muniz. Now, Vic Muniz, you know, for about 10 years, 15 years, he made a lot of artwork out of trash. He took great masters and great works, and he basically recomposed them using objects that have been discarded. So things that from a dump. And I think, you know, Brazil is also famous for dumps and its trash pickers. Well, Vic Muniz is one of them. And on the right is my right is his rendition of Caravaggio's Eros. And all the objects that you see there are from the dumpster. And then he takes a picture of it, aerial photograph. So it's very large scale, really quite remarkable art. That's the kind of upcycling I'm going to suggest that a similar sort of upcycling that Ruskin is doing in Unto This Last by using the ancients. Here's another Caravaggio, as it happens. Muniz did this with many different great masters, old masters, but Medusa with her head. You know, I'm trying to see what the objects are in that image that he's created. Refrigerators, tires, really quite genius. Good use to put trash to. And then you've got something as simple as this, you know, Picasso's famous, you know, bull and bicycle seat and handlebars just thrown together, probably worth a couple $1 million or more now. But again, the serendipitous, but also carefully studied assemblage of of discarded objects or older material and making it new, as Rapound says that poetry's job is to make it new. We see it in the visual arts here. And finally, a little higher brow is this example. This is the Church of Santa Maria di Trastevere in Rome. I was a resident at the American Academy of Rome, which was just up the hill, from Trastevere on the Janiculum. And this church is fascinating because it's a spolia church. It's made up of, as many churches in Italy and around, especially Italy, but around the world are, made up of the spoils of older buildings, older defunct, dilapidated, or destroyed buildings. So in the nave of Santa Maria di Trastevere, you have the columns that came from the Isis temple on the Janiculum, the pagan Roman temple, and they hauled them down here, down there, and reused them in the church. I love that kind of mixed medium and the centuries that are represented in all churches really, but that very intentional repurposing of expensive and precious materials from the past to invigorate a new dispensation, a new dispensation of ideas, in this case, Christianity from the ruins of old paganism. So I think that might be all I have for pictures. It is. So now I'm going to cease to share this, and I'm going to move to another mode, but I don't, all right, so I just want to check that you can't see my screen. Is that correct? Can somebody just give me a thumbs up? No, I saw a head shake. Okay, so what I'm going to do, again, hat in hand, is I'm going to read an adapted version of the fourth chapter of Following Nature's Lead. And it's about Ruskin and a really strange bedfellow, Georges Bataille, but I'm not going to talk about Bataille at all. I'm just going to talk about Ruskin. I don't usually read like a paper. I haven't done this in a very long time, but I figured this is kind of a very soft book launch. And so I thought I would give you a reading because I'm not going to get another chance. So this is what's going to happen. I do have a handout, and the handout I believe is being shared in the chat. And I will point you to the handout, which is just contains the quotations that I have in the larger quotations, the longer ones that I'll be referencing in this talk. And you can just be diverted from me on the screen and look at the piece of paper to read them if you want. A couple of them are on the long side, but well worth it, at least I think. So I'm ready to go if you are. Great. So, when in Unto This Last, Ruskin decries mercenary exchange as a, quote, science built on nescience that, quote, depends wholly on the ignorance, powerlessness, or heedlessness of the person dealt with, he deploys Latin wordplay to engage in scathing social critique. By the way, I think, since you can all see me, I'm not going to do this quote unquote business throughout the whole paper. It's going to drive me crazy. So I'm just going to like maybe hold my hand up like a Roman orator when I'm quoting something, so you get a sense, and then put my hand down when I stop. I think you'll be able to differentiate Ruskin's words from mine, I hope. But even so, I'll try to remember to do that. Similarly, in the run-up to the treatise's stunning conclusion, the oft-quoted "there is no wealth but life," printed in Roman capitals as if it were an epitaph for capitalism or a decree of the SPQR, Ruskin launches into an etymological lesson about the word value, from the verb valeo, valere, to avail towards life, and observes sarcastically that if our well-educated merchants recalled to mind always this much of their Latin schooling, political economies worldwide would be more equitable and just. Ruskin's repurposing of the classics pervades Unto This Last. On the surface, his classical allusions are bombastic and rhetorical. At the structural level of his argument, however, the Greco-Roman influences run deeper and have been less discussed, perhaps because Ruskin's Plutarch and Plato intermingle so ingeniously with passages from Old and New Testament greats. Previous commentators on Unto This Last have missed much of the nuance and implication of Ruskin's references. His engagement with the classics, I suggest, is not perfunctory or pretty window dressing for his prose. Rather, it represents a creative upcycling of the past to address contemporary concerns. Ruskin, himself a resourceful artist of considerable talent, scours the scrap heap of history to construct a newly useful and morally beautiful economic worldview out of the detritus of antiquity. This, however, is not the usual view, to judge by Shrimpton's verdict. This is item number 1 on your handout. Though Ruskin's literary gifts gave it a distinctive formulation, he avers, his social thought was not unique. It derived from Tory economics of the late 1920s and 30s, and from the work of the Goethist writers like, above all, Carlyle, whose profound, though reactionary influence Ruskin frequently acknowledged. It is Ruskin's descriptive genius, rather than his powers of analysis, which makes his political writing interesting. There is no doubt that Ruskin, like the rest of us, was a product of his times, influenced by contemporary discourse and debates on economic and aesthetic matters. But to reduce, and by implication dismiss, Ruskin's economic thinking as derivative of immediate precursors flies in the face of what he himself says in the preface to Unto This Last. The real gist of these papers, Ruskin declares there, their central meaning and aim, is to give, as I believe for the first time, in plain English, it has often been incidentally given in good Greek by Plato and Xenophon, and good Latin by Cicero and Horace, a logical definition of wealth. Ruskin assumes a similar posture in Munera Pulveris, the conception of which was coeval with Unto This Last, where he observes, quote, "The public has revolted against these papers of mine as if they contained things daring and new. Yet there is not one assertion in them of which the truth has not been for ages known to the wisest and proclaimed by the most eloquent." Whereupon he quotes Horace, one of his named sources for the ideas behind Unto This Last, approvingly and in Latin, on how wealth is worthless if you do not know how to use it properly. That's from Satires, Book 2. A point Horace gets from Aristotle before him, as we shall see. To understand what constitutes wealth, Ruskin insists, the recent past is of little use. So Tory economics from the 1820s and 30s isn't going to cut it. The origins of Ruskin's economic ideas lie in pre-modernity. In adducing Plato as a witness, for example, Ruskin has in mind the laws, which he quotes favorably in Munera Pulveris, and he had once entertained the notion of translating entire. The citizens of Plato's ideal community described in the laws, the philosopher's last work, consider life or soul, the word is in Greek is psyche, as their most godlike possession. They're forbidden by law to touch silver or gold and use only coinage as a means of internal exchange for everyday needs. In evoking Cicero, Ruskin refers primarily to the De Officiis, the treatise on duties. As for Xenophon, this treatise, the Economicus, or household management, was a definitive influence and became the crown jewel in the Ruskin anthology Bibliotheca Pastorum, a library for shepherds, from 1876, translated by none other than Ruskin's devoted student and posthumous editor, Alexander Wedderburn, assisted by W.G. Collingwood. Ruskin himself oversaw the work and provided a preface. Ruskin found in Xenophon, whose treatise is essentially a guide to running a self-sufficient farm, a faultless definition of wealth and explanation of its dependence for efficiency on the merits and faculties of its possessor. As for example, in this exchange, and this is item number 2 on your handout from Xenophon. Socrates, it seems then that in your view, what is beneficial is wealth, what is harmful is not wealth. Critobulus, yes, that's right, Socrates. In other words, the same things are wealth and not wealth according to whether one understands how to use them or not. In what follows, I would like to highlight a few additional points of contact with antiquity and unto this last that bear closer scrutiny than they have received. The connections are perhaps more oblique and indirect than the foregoing, but that only makes them more interesting, to me at least. In any event, the thinking behind the ancient works in question clearly informs Ruskin's views on wealth and human welfare, and so merit our attention on that score alone. Xenophon, it will be seen, is just the tip of the iceberg. In discussing oikonomia, or house management, whence the word economy, what Ruskin glosses as house law, in the Politics, Aristotle declares that money is merely a token and means of exchange, not an end in itself. It is, in fact, as he puts it rather colorfully, worthless junk. The word is leiros in Greek, and wholly conventional. By nature, he says, it is nothing. Proper economic management, he argues further, quote, takes more care for a household's human persons than for its inanimate goods. This last is an enlightened statement that Ruskin wears on his sleeve. One might say it is the organizing premise behind the whole of Unto This Last, beginning with the example of the starving mother and her crust of bread. Ruskin begins Unto This Last with this Dickensian image, but his real point of departure was a builder's strike in the autumn of 1859 that the then new self-proclaimed, quote, science of political economy, touted by David Ricardo and John Stuart Mill, Ruskin insists, is powerless to resolve, much less comprehend. Market logic proceeds by a calculation wherein what Ruskin calls the social affections are, quote, accidental and disturbing elements in human nature, whereas acquisitiveness and a desire for progress are the constant ones. Let us eliminate the inconstants, Ruskin imagines his economist opponents to say, and, considering the human being merely as a covetous machine, examine by what laws of labor, purchase, and sale the greatest accumulative result in wealth is obtainable. But human relationships, Ruskin points out, do not work according to this calculus. The disturbing elements in the social problem, he notes, are not of the same nature as the constant ones. They alter the essence of the creature under examination the moment they are added. They operate not mathematically, but chemically. End quote. The social problem of a workers' strike consists in the relationship between an employer and the employed, the first vital problem that political economy has to deal with, says Ruskin. Market economics pronounces the impasse of a strike to be a clash of interests that produces an antagonism between the two parties. But the mother and her crust introduce a disturbing element that changes the equation. This is item number 3 on your handout. If there is only a crust of bread in the house, Ruskin observes, and the mother and children are starving, their interests are not the same. If the mother eats it, the children want it. If the children eat it, the mother must go hungry to her work. Yet it does not necessarily follow that there will be antagonism between them, that they will fight for the crust, and that the mother, being the strongest, will get it and eat it. Neither in any other case, Ruskin concludes, whatever the relations of the persons may be, can it be assumed for certain that because their interests are diverse, they must necessarily regard each other with hostility. The real problem with capital acquisition, according to Aristotle, is that money is not only junk, it is unlimited. This is what makes unearned income and usury so pernicious. And this quote is number 4 on your handout. Its gain comes from money itself, Aristotle remarks, and not from that for the sake of which money was invented. For money was brought into existence for the purpose of exchange, but interest increases the amount of money itself. Consequently, this form of the business of getting wealth is of all forms the most contrary to nature. Accordingly, Aristotle recommends, unambiguously, there should be a limit to all wealth. For Ruskin, One mechanism to ensure such limits in a market economy is the willing readiness of merchants and the financial sector generally to accept voluntary loss, as does civil society's other professions, for example, soldier, physician, or a clergyman. In true commerce, he argues, as in true preaching or true fighting, it is necessary to admit the idea of occasional voluntary loss. The market may have its martyrdoms as well as the pulpit, he adds, and trade its heroisms as well as war. The Greek word for interest in Aristotle's passage, tokos, literally means offspring. It was by Aristotle's time a dead metaphor, yet drawn paradoxically from the language of biological reproduction, prompting Aristotle to etymologize it for us. This is how the word arose, he says. Things that are born, he observes, using its base verb tikto, resemble their parents. And so interest, tokos, is money born of money. We might imagine Aristotle fuming a bit beneath the surface of his text at the outrageousness of using a natural metaphor to describe what he regarded as an unnatural practice. Unnatural, that is, because in his view, self-increase and growth is not money's purpose. It is a means of exchange only. The ends of the exchange are the human beings on either side of a given transaction. Philosopher Byung-Chul Han, in a loosely Marxist analysis of the problem of freedom in a capitalist society, brings Aristotle's critique up to date for our era. And this is number 5 on the handout. Capital reproduces by entering into relations with itself as another form of capital through free competition. It copulates with the other of itself by way of individual freedom. Capital grows inasmuch as people engage in free competition. Hereby, individual freedom amounts to servitude, inasmuch as capital lays hold of it and uses it for its own propagation. That is, capital exploits individual freedom in order to breed. In the process, the individuals degrade into the genital organs of capital. Against mere self-replication of capital through indiscriminate breeding, Ruskin sees justice as the regulating constant in human affairs, a factor that works chemically upon its practitioners. A concern for justice thus permeates the whole of his vision for a healthy political economy, even where it is not the explicit focus of discussion in any given instance. The title of the third of the 4 essays that make up unto this last, for example, is Qui Judicatis Terram. Its Latin phrase, the first words of the Vulgate book Wisdom of Solomon, an authoritative part of the Roman Catholic canon of Scripture, part of the Protestant Apocrypha, means, quote, you who judge the earth, referring to those that hold power. But the resonant core of the thought is the unquoted command in the first half of the title sentence in the source text, alluded to later in the essay. Diligite justitiam, love justice. Ruskin's predilection for economy's etymological and conceptual roots, the house law of Aristotle and Xenophon, and those authors' prioritizing of the household's persons over its material goods, form the backbone of his thinking. In his relentless pursuit of justice, Ruskin is again following Plato. The affiliation is captured perfectly in Ruskin's conclusion about ultimate value, which reads like a page out of the Republic. And this is number 6 on your handout. The whole question, therefore, respecting not only the advantage, but even the quantity of national wealth, resolves itself finally into one of abstract justice. It is impossible to conclude of any given mass of acquired wealth merely by the fact of its existence, whether it signifies good or evil to the nation in the midst of which it exists. Its real value depends on the moral sign attached to it. Ruskin illustrates what he means by this with a parable, in his telling far better than this mere summary here. 2 sailors are cast away on an uninhabited coast. At first, they farm the land of the interior in common and prosper. Over time, They decide, out of no enmity, to divide the land into equal shares and prosper still, each to his own, until one of them falls ill. Naturally, the sick man will ask his friend to help him sow and harvest. The healthy man, with perfect justice, Ruskin says, might ask for a written promise stating that his sick friend will give equal hours of labor in return when he recovers to compensate him for loss due to time away from work at his own farm. This arrangement persists for several years. Both properties, Ruskin observes, and both men will have suffered loss. The healthy man unable to devote full time to his own affairs, and the sick man the same, now indebted on top of all that for several years' worth of labor to the other. Considered as a polis or state, Ruskin writes, they will be poorer than they would have been otherwise, and the relations in which they stand to each other are also widely altered. End quote. Add a third man to the mix, Ruskin observes, and the outcome becomes worse. The division of land is into thirds. Each man specializes in a certain kind of produce to maximize his comparative advantage. To administer the transfer of goods from one farm to the other, one of them agrees to be a superintendent in exchange for some remunerative share of the goods conveyed. Soon this middleman sees his own comparative advantage of hoarding goods to create scarcity, quote, ingeniously watching his opportunities to possess himself regularly of the greater part of the superfluous produce of the two estates. The result, as Ruskin notes, is mercantile wealth. And, as in the parable of the two castaways, number 7 on your handout, the wealth of the state, or of all three men considered as a society, is collectively less than it would have been had the merchant been content with juster profit. The operations of the two agriculturalists have been cramped to the utmost, he explains, and the continual limitations of the supply of things they wanted at critical times, together with the failure of courage consequent on the prolongation of a struggle for mere existence without any sense of permanent gain, must have seriously diminished the effective results of their labor. And the stores finally accumulated in the merchant's hands will not in any wise be of equivalent value to those which, had his dealings been honest, would have filled at once the granaries of the farmers and his own. Had his dealings been honest. That, for Ruskin, is the crux of the issue. The homology of macrocosmic polis to microcosmic soul that Plato articulates throughout the Republic is played out differently in Ruskin, but the idea is the same. The quality of collective wealth and well-being depends on the morality and integrity of persons. Plato, too, offers a parable about political economy in an Ur community that foreshadows and perhaps inspired Ruskin's analysis. Before launching into his lengthy description of the training of the guardian class, Plato, through his mouthpiece Socrates, runs a simulation to hypothesize how the first human communities arose organically out of reciprocal need. And this is item 8 on your handout. None of us is self-sufficient, Socrates declares outright. Do you think that any other originating principle causes a city to be built? It is mutual need, Greek word is kreia, Socrates infers, that creates human communities. One person has recourse to one person, another to another. The one because of need, the other for a different need. Lacking as they do many things, they gather many people into one settlement to be both partners and helpers. To this collective living arrangement, we have given the name city. Where is justice to be found in such a community? Socrates asks. Perhaps, his interlocutor Adeimantus replies, somewhere in the kind of need these people have of one another. That's a quote. Another interlocutor, Glaucon, Plato's older brother, likens Socrates' aboriginal agrarian city, one characterized by communitarian values and vegetarian simplicity, in which inhabitants, quote, take pleasure in sex with one another, but as a precaution against poverty or war, will not produce children beyond their means. People who, when they grow old and die, pass on to their progeny a way of life, just like the one they themselves enjoyed. All that's a quote. Glaucon compares that to a city fit only for slop-eating pigs, for its lack of refined cuisine. It becomes clear to Socrates that the ensuing conversation will not be about the sustainable agrarian polity he describes as true and healthy, but a disquisition on the luxurious, feverish cities of his own day. From that point in the dialogue, the rest of the Republic proceeds with philosophical prescriptions to cure such cities, like his contemporary Athens, sick with fever. Plato's speculation that cooperation, not competition, lies at the heart of healthy communities forms part of his larger program to define justice. He compares his investigation into what constitutes political economy as big letters on a billboard that are easier to read than the fine print needed to describe a human soul. That's straight from the Republic. But just as harmony amongst parts characterizes the healthy city, so too the soul, whose rational, spirited, and appetitive functions do their own jobs properly and do not encroach on each other's work and thus put one's life out of balance. It is hardly a stretch or overstatement to characterize Plato's larger hopes for human flourishing in the Republic, as are Ruskin's in Unto This Last, with the words of the old slogan, from each according to his ability, to each according to his need. Yet Ruskin's comradeship with this idea, as we shall see, owes allegiance not to Marx and company, but harks back instead to Plato and his ilk. The view about the role of justice in a mercantile economy that Ruskin ultimately adopts in Unto This Last is surprisingly akin to one propounded by its earliest advocate, the Greek poet Hesiod from 750 BCE or thereabouts, who deeply influenced Plato's thinking too. This is item number 9 on your handout. Political economy, Ruskin writes, the economy of a state or of citizens, consists simply in the production, preservation, and distribution at fittest time and place of useful or pleasurable things. The farmer who cuts his hay at the right time, the shipwright who drives his bolts well home in sound wood, the builder who lays good bricks in well-tempered mortar, the housewife who takes care of her furniture in the parlor and guards against all waste in her kitchen, and the singer who rightly disciplines and never overstrains her voice, are all political economists in the true and final sense, adding continually to the riches and well-being of the nation to which they belong. This assessment is but a stone's throw away from Hesiod's excellent advice from his poem Works and Days. As Ruskin quotes that poem elsewhere in Unto This Last, in Greek no less, there's no doubt that he had been reading the Bard from Boeotia. Indeed, Hesiod was planned for inclusion in the Bibliotheca Pastorum, had that project advanced beyond the first published volume. So the choice was apt, since Hesiod himself, that's interesting, a little rap number with Hesiod being the topic here. The choice was apt since Hesiod himself was a shepherd, and his poem comprised a sort of Poor Richard's Almanac of miscellaneous advice about living in an agricultural milieu, cautioning his audience not to overload a ship with goods for trade, to give one example among several, lest it sink, or a wagon, lest its axle break. Hesiod declares, and this is item number 10, we're about halfway through, for those of you who need to know. Do not put all your provisions in hollow boats. Load the lesser part and leave the bulk aside. For it's a disaster to meet with grief on the waves at sea. Awful too, if by hoisting excess, the Greek word is huperbios, excess weight onto your wagon, you wreck its axle and the cargo is ruined. Observe measures. Rightness, kairos, is best in all things. The word kairos in Greek, translated above as rightness, is virtually a gloss on the preceding word in the first half of that line, measures, Greek metra. The word is drawn from the vocabulary of archery and weaving. In ancient archery, kairos referred to a vulnerable aperture in a target at which one aimed, like a bullseye or a chink in armor. In weaving, it denoted the triangular opening where a weaver sent the woof thread attached to a shuttle through the warp, not unlike the English word loophole. From these original uses, the word came to mean doing something skillfully with precision at just the right moment. It is telling that Plato uses the same word and idea to characterize the cooperative work of the inhabitants of his healthy city, where each person does, quote, does his work exactly when and how it needs to be done. The word I translate as provisions in Hesiod above literally means life, and the Greek word for life is bios, as in the means of life. The adjective excess is huperbios, which the dictionaries will tell you derives from the Greek noun bia, which means force or strength, but coming hard on the heels of bios, the word meaning life, and in the hands of a resourceful poet like Hesiod, who was always keen on folk etymologies, suggests the phrase beyond, hyper, or hyper, what life, bios, requires. Or perhaps not unfairly in this context, surplus. Even if that was true, did Ruskin know any of this? There's no way to tell, but it doesn't matter, as his equation of wealth and trade with fostering life and his call to observe the just times and seasons of good measure put him squarely in Hesiod's camp. So Ruskin asks in the final essay of Unto This Last, and this is number 11 on your handout, since the essence of wealth consists in power over men, will it not follow that the nobler and more in number the persons over whom it has power, the greater the wealth? Perhaps it may even appear, after some consideration, that the persons themselves are the wealth. To support this claim, Ruskin turns once again to Antiquity and a story preserved by the anecdotist Valerius Maximus about Cornelia, the mother of the brothers Gracchi, Gaius and Tiberius. Cornelia, Valerius recounts, was entertaining a fellow mother from Campania as a guest in her house. The Campanian matron was quite keen to show off her jewelry, the finest work on offer at that time. Cornelia kept her guest engaged in conversation about her bijoux until Tiberius and Gaius returned home from school, whereupon she declared in turn, "These are my jewels." And it is an interesting choice of anecdote, invoked briefly to exemplify Ruskin's view that, quote, the true veins of wealth are purple and not in rock, but in flesh. Perhaps even that the final outcome and consummation of all wealth is in the producing of as many as possible full-breathed, bright-eyed, and happy-hearted human creatures. That's a quote. The Gracchi became martyrs for the cause of economic and social reform and were lionized as such in ancient Rome. Tiberius, as tribune of the plebs, championed a comprehensive bill in 133 BCE designed to enforce a centuries-old law limiting landholding by individual Roman citizens. Its purpose was to break up large estates, latifundia, essentially factory farms, and redistribute land to the growing number of landless poor and veterans who had found themselves displaced and were migrating to the overpopulated metropolis. More than a little like the situation spawned by the enclosures and the Industrial Revolution that Ruskin was seeking to redress. For his efforts, Tiberius was assassinated by senatorial elites. Gaius, who took up his brother's reformist mantle, also paid for it with his life. Doubtless, these details were not lost on Ruskin, who perhaps means his readers to recall the Gracchi's politics of just distribution and their valor. Even the market must have its martyrdoms. This final essay is in fact entitled Ad Valorem. It contains an inquiry into what constitutes value. Ruskin's conclusion is that, quote, the value of a thing is independent of opinion and of quantity. Think what you will of it, gain how much you may of it. The value of a thing itself is neither greater nor less. To drive his point home and to debunk the card-carrying economist notion, in this case Mills, that value is simply something's market worth in exchange, Ruskin summons up the classics once again, this time with both irony and indignation. This is number 12. Much store has been set for centuries upon the use of our English classical education. It were to be wished that our well-educated merchants recalled to mind always this much of their Latin schooling, that the nominative of valorem, a word already sufficiently familiar to them, is valor, a word which therefore ought to be familiar to them. Valor, from valere, to be well or strong, hugiaino in Greek, strong in life, if a man, or valiant, strong for life, if a thing, or valuable. To be valuable, therefore, is to, quote, avail towards life. A truly valuable or availing thing is that which leads to life with its whole strength. In proportion as it does not lead to life, or as its strength is broken, it is less valuable. In proportion as it leads away from life, it is unvaluable or malignant. Ruskin's definition of wealth has Xenophon written all over it, from the use of the word hugiaino in the opening salvo to the last sentence, which is essentially a paraphrase from the Economicus. Indeed, Ruskin's ingenious coining of his infamous antonym for wealth, ilth, owes a good deal to Socrates' view in Xenophon, quoted earlier, that, quote, what is harmful, and the Greek there is ta blaptonta, is not wealth. That's from Xenophon. Aristotle's dismay at characterizing interest as tokos, offspring, in his time finds its corollary in Ruskin's impatience with twisted notions of wealth that fail to account for the human persons involved in its creation. The late Francis O'Gorman, a brilliant Ruskin scholar and companion in Ruskin's Guild of St. George, was troubled by what he called, quote, the posthumous conversion of John Ruskin into a figurehead for, and often enough, a founder of socialism. Often enough, O'Gorman laments, the claim of being influenced by involves not reading and being inspired by a writer's ideas, but by rereading or misreading them, or looking only for portions taken out of context with which we agree, end quote. Ruskin was, he continues, as Shrimpton notes, and that's in Gorman's quote, as Shrimpton notes, no actual source of socialist orthodoxies. He was, for example, quote, untouched by such concepts as surplus value, alienation, class struggle, or dialectical materialism. It's true enough, but it is a legitimate question to ask, as O'Gorman himself seems prepared to entertain, whether all readings of the past are, in a sense, misreadings or appropriations. Whatever view one holds on that point, the direction in which Ruskin was reading was to the rear of the recent past and of his contemporaries. Marx, after all, was living in London at the time until this last appeared, working feverishly on the last 2 volumes of Das Kapital, and nary a word. When Ruskin declares of himself that he is, quote, a communist of the old school, reddest also of the red, in Fors Clavigera, the occasion for the comment is news that he had received of the burning of the Louvre during the Paris Commune riots on May 23rd, 1871. This is item number 13 on your list. For indeed, I am myself a communist of the old school, he writes in July. Reddest also of the red, and was on the very point of saying so at the end of my last letter. Only the telegram about the Louvre being on fire stopped me, because I thought the communists of the new school, as I could not at all understand them, might not quite understand me. For we communists of the old school think that our property belongs to everybody, and everybody's property to us. So of course, I thought the Louvre belonged to me just as much as to the Parisians, and expected that they would have sent word over to me, being an art professor, to ask whether I wanted it burnt down. But no message or intimation to that effect ever reached me. The sarcasm here is unvarnished, and Ruskin was clearly smitten by his own ironical stance, for he continues the rant of this letter in Fors with various further clarifications of his position, beginning with the hue of the red And these last quotes are long, and I apologize, but they're just too good to skip. To paraphrase. So this is number 14 on your handout. We old reds fall into two classes, differing not indeed in color of redness, but in depth of tint of it. One class being, as it were, only of a delicately pink peach blossom or dog rose redness, but the other, to which I myself do partly and desire wholly to belong, as I told you, reddest of the red, that is to say, full crimson, or even dark crimson, passing into that deep color of the blood, which made the Spaniards call it blue instead of red, and which the Greeks call phoinikaos, being an intense phoenix or flamingo color. And this, not merely, as in the flamingo feathers, a color on the outside, but going through and through, ruby-wise. Ruskin's red-blooded communism entails not the abolition or expropriation of private property, but rather a curious mixture that might result if you crossed Sir Thomas More's Utopia with Peter Kropotkin's The Conquest of Bread. His description of it bears quoting at length. All right, strap in your seatbelt. Here we go. Public or common wealth shall be more and statelier in all its substance than private or singular wealth. That is to say, to come to my own special business for a moment, that there shall be only cheap and few pictures, if any, in the insides of houses, where nobody but the owner can see them, but costly pictures, and many on the outsides of houses, where the people can see them. Also, that the Hotel de Ville, or hotel of the whole town, for the transaction of its common business, shall be a magnificent building, much rejoiced in by the people, and with its tower seen far away through the clean air. But that the hotels for private business or pleasure, cafes, taverns, and the like, shall be low, few, plain, and in back streets, more especially such as furnish singular and uncommon drinks and refreshments, but that the fountains which furnish people's common drink shall be very lovely and stately and adorned with precious marbles and the like. Then farther, according to old communism, the private dwellings of uncommon persons, dukes and lords, are to be very simple and roughly put together, such persons being supposed to be above all care for things that please the commonality. But the buildings for public or common service, more especially schools, almshouses, and workhouses, are to be externally of a majestic character, as being for noble purposes and charities, and in their interiors furnished with many luxuries for the poor and sick. And finally, and chiefly, it is an absolute law of old communism that the fortunes of private persons should be small and of little account in the state, but the common treasure of the whole nation should be of superb and precious things in redundant quantity, as pictures, statues, precious books, gold and silver vessels, preserved from ancient times, gold and silver bullion laid up for use in case of any chance need of buying anything suddenly from foreign nations, noble horses, cattle, and sheep on the public lands, and vast spaces of land for culture, exercise, and garden, round the cities, full of flowers, which, being everybody's property, nobody could gather, and of birds, which, being everybody's property, nobody could shoot. And, in a word, that instead of a common poverty or national debt, which every poor person in the nation is taxed annually to fulfill his part of, there should be a common wealth or national reserve of debt, consisting of pleasant things, which every poor person in the nation should be summoned to receive his dole of annually, and of pretty things, which every person capable of admiration, foreigners as well as natives, should unfeignedly admire in an aesthetic and not a covetous manner. A fat Latin communist gave for sign of strength of his commonality in its strongest time, privatus illis census erat brevis, common magnum, which you may get any of your boys or girls to translate for you. And remembering also that the commonality or publicity depends for its goodness on the nature of the thing that is common, and that is public. It is revealing that this beatific vision unfurled here resolves itself into the words of Horace and his poem about the pitfalls of privatized luxury, which comes from Odes, Book 2. The Latin translates, quote, for them, referring to Romulus, Rome's legendary founding shepherd, and Cato the Elder, the Republic's staunchest advocate, private assets were small, the commonwealth great. In fact, Horace observes in the next lines, left by Ruskin unquoted, but paraphrased amply in the tirade prior, Roman law under the Republic, and this is Horace, quote, insisted that towns and the temples of the gods should be beautified at public expense with fresh cut stone. But lest there be any doubt as to the sources of Ruskin's political and economic thinking, he openly declares them at the outset of this diatribe. I will content myself with telling you what we communists of the old school mean by communism, and it will be worth your hearing, for I tell you simply, in my arrogant way, we know and have known what communism is, for our fathers knew it and told us 3,000 years ago. The impetus for Ruskin's creative upcycling of old ideas to address the situation of his own time. Here's my peroration, if you're still awake. Invites comparison with a now well-worn phrase that arose in Paris from the circles of fashion, and one which Ruskin might have approved had he been aware. Plus ça change, plus c'est la même chose. The more things change, the more they stay the same. And an observation by Jean-Baptiste Alphonse Carr, editor of Le Figaro, which first appeared in the January 1849 issue of the satirical magazine Les Guêpes, the Wasps. But considering Ruskin's penchant for biblical idiom, there is also this similar view expressed by the preacher. The thing that has been is that which shall be, and that which is done is that which shall be done, and there is no new thing under the sun. Ecclesiastes 1:9. Either way, in Unto This Last, Ruskin found the materials to build a new society strewn about in the waste bin of humanity's past. This admirably heuristic approach to problems of political economy is also an ecological one, as it represents a repurposing of proven materials we already have close to hand. The ancients, as Ruskin shows us from his own day and age, could very well be the best hope for ours, too. C'est fini. Thank you. No, I can't hear anybody talking.
Okay, sorry. We had a technical issue there. Thank you, Mark, very much for embodying that Ruskinian polymathic ideal by weaving together so many disparate threads in your talk. And I really appreciate the handout very much. That was great. Super helpful. Can you remind us when your book is going to be available for purchase?
It's available now. It was published day before yesterday.
Oh, okay. All right. You need to sick Amazon on that.
And you all get it. You all are getting a discount. This is like this is the soft book launch. Princeton's, I think, offering 30% off or something with a coupon that Gabriel knows something about.
Oh, wonderful. Okay. I'll let him mention some more about that in his wrap up. But thank you for that. And thank you for gamely soldiering on during that Zoom bomb. That is the first one I've seen in 4 years. I didn't even know what the heck was happening. I'm like, whoa, wait, this is a thing still? Oh, so sorry about that.
No problem.
So the Ruskin Art Club, we've been reading through the Stones of Venice for this past year, and I think we need to do the same with Unto This Last and Fors Clavigeria, maybe 1 year and then the year after, because, oh my gosh, those just have so many nuggets. I really appreciate the passages that you selected there. You've given us a lot to think about. I want to make sure everybody has some time for questions. I just thought on that, the penultimate one on number 15 on your handout, when you were talking about the national reverse of debt, those almost sound like sovereign wealth funds, which exist today, right? And like the Alaska Oil Fund as well, which is that's a kind of sort of a I guess a state wealth fund that is distributed to all the people. So in some sense, some places seem to be living up to that Ruskinian ideal. Not so sure he'd be so happy that it's coming from the despoliation of the environment. But okay, well, halfway there maybe. So that's all I wanted to say. I want to give other people the opportunity to say a few things.
Thank you, Tyson.
Can I ask something? Uh, are you hearing me?
Yeah,
Yes, I
yeah.
am.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you, uh, Mark. I've never thought in making that relation with to this last with the antique. It's very interesting. But is it possible that Ruskin was thinking about in his political economy theory about a welfare state, a policy
Um,
of a nation? Yeah, sorry.
yeah. And unto this last, I mean, the way we define a welfare state, I don't think he has that in mind as a centrally controlled kind of tax-driven government knows best. I mean, I might espouse that idea, but I don't think he's espousing that idea. He seems to be much more of a more paternalistic view of how the merchant class should be the ones who are the just distributors of wealth by paying fair wage and by the willingness to take voluntary loss, as I understand unto this last. Now, Ruskin's larger economic ideas and the development of them or whatever, I'm less familiar with, so I couldn't answer that question for his for him as a whole. But in unto this last, he doesn't seem to be calling for a welfare state. I mean, Rome wasn't a welfare state. The Republic wasn't in that sense, but they had a very strong sense of public spirit. They took other people's property and made it the state's. So, I mean, Ruskin's not well. Actually, he's not advocating for that. He decries the colonialism of his time and other passages. So he's not advocating for that either. But so he means something different from a welfare state when he's talking about national wealth. I think maybe somebody on the line here on the call knows something more about this than I do. But it seems to me it's something different than what we understand as welfare state.
Yeah, Mark, when William Morris, who of course who was a socialist, um, was pressing Ruskin to join the Socialist League because he thought Ruskin's name would lend, greater credence to their efforts. Because Ruskin, of course, had great respect for Morris, he sort of dodged it for a while, and finally, when Morris pins him down about this, he just writes to Morris, I cannot be in one of his letters, I cannot be a socialist because I do not trust the government to execute justice in this way.
All right.
So
So
in a real way, he's almost more of a kind of a classic anarchist in that local communities should organize themselves
that's a great
properly rather than a notion of the state, somehow creating a one size fits all sort of model.
And of course, Ruskin also says elsewhere, Claudio, that he was a violent Tory of the old school too, just like his father. So he's playing with expectations and having people guess what he is.
That's right.
But that's great, Gabriel. I think you're right. It's much more like anarcho-syndicalism. I can't remember what it's even called, but that localized Colin Ward kind of anarchism.
Yeah. And I love Mark that comment when he says, "I'm a Tory of the old school, like my father, Sir Walter Scott, and to your point, and Homer."
Homer?
And Homer, he
I should
makes
know
into the
that.
list. I once asked our dear departed brother, Clive Wilmer, I said, Clive, do you have any idea what he meant by that? But it's such a wonderful list. Like a violent, he called violent old Tory, like my father, Sir Walter Scott, and Homer.
Interesting. I'll have to look at that. I want to know what he meant by that too now. I have to see the
Yes.
context.
Yeah, I would just add, I was thinking about a similar issue. I'm Zach. Thank you very much for your talk. I saw it publicized in Harper's Magazine a month or so ago, and so I'm very excited that you're here, and to
Oh,
also know you're a companion of the Guild. Um,
right.
but one of the things about Ruskin's political economy, he does have this sort of anarchic element. I was thinking of that word too, as Gabriel earlier. And what he's doing onto this last, to me, is really just articulating principles, the right relationship between producers and consumers. He's bad on policy. He's never a policy writer, but he was interested in, this first principles idea about justice and how do we create things that are healthy and consume things that are healthy. On the flip side of that, to Tyson's point earlier about Ruskin being contradictory, some of his ideas are sort of statist or state centric. The idea that you would have like the state thinking about, oh, there are people that need to be put to work, let's put them to work. Or, talking about, well, let's make sure that the poor can get things distributed to them, like you were quoting earlier. And so he's a little confused in that way. And I think for me that I enjoy that. I think that's okay. Because I don't know how you do this. And I don't think he did either. And I think depending on what he was talking about, he leaned into one of those things more than another. Because he does have this, in Munera Polaris, I think he's a little more paternalist in his view of the government and the economy than he is in Unto This Last.
Yeah.
But I think I think that for me, that's what makes Ruskin interesting, is there is this tension between these two things. So this element of Unto This Last, almost like you could a kind of radical bartering sort of thing, everyone producing things that make sense in their place, while also this notion of we should have like art that's for everyone. Right, which doesn't happen in a more anarchist, sort of situation. So, it's that tension
Zach,
in Ruskin that is interesting.
if you have anything in print on your computer to that effect, I'd be happy to receive it via email. Any reference to what you said about his occasional statism or siding with the government business. I'd like to see it if you could. I mean, whatever. If you have something.
Yeah, I think the political economy of art, which is 1858, kind of addresses those sorts of things. I think it slants more in that direction. And as I was saying, Munera Polaris is a little more in that direction too. But Gabe might have some other references.
Right.
Even the notion of commonwealth that he champions. I love his comment. I think, forget where it is, maybe in traffic, but anyway, he says he knows this. He says they say I contradict myself. He says if I don't contradict myself 3 times in the course of a lecture, I've not done my job. He says you'll have to content yourself this time with twice.
I think that is traffic because I recall that comment.
It's wonderful.
Remember that.
Hi, Abe. Hi, Mark. Wonderful talk. Sorry we came in a bit late, unavoidably, but we enjoyed it immensely. And then we just heard you, who was it, quoting Whitman, that if do I contradict myself? Very well, then I contradict myself. And Emerson, who says, consistency is the hobgoblin of petty minds. So one thing Ruskin ain't is a petty mind. So I don't know if he goes all the way to anarchy, but he does balance some very heavy weights on either side of a spectrum.
Stuart, you might have missed me trying to quote Ruskin and accidentally quoting Whitman at the very beginning. That's where that started. Yeah.
Yeah, I did. I missed because I was unwrapping something very exciting. I have just acquired by accident. It came up in an auction in Boston. A dozen albumin photographs taken by William Edward Gray in 1893 of Whistler's 12 of the 24 known of Whistler's paintings, photographs of Whistler's paintings, one of which is of Thomas Carlyle, who came to Whistler and saw a portrait of his mother and said, "Do me." And another is the painting of that caused Whistler to sue Ruskin for his libelous comments about a pot of paint.
Right.
And all 12 of these are signed twice by Whistler in pencil. Whistler and the butterfly. They're extremely rare and extremely wonderful, and I was completely distracted by their arrival moments before the period. Pardon
Well,
me.
you should.
Yeah.
I have an interesting anecdote about that, and that is I had dinner with our neighbors. Our neighbors had friends over for dinner. He's an art dealer. Can't remember his first name is James, but he once owned that painting by Whistler that Ruskin libelized.
Oh, Nocturne in Black and Gold, the falling.
It's a falling
Yeah.
rocket. Yeah.
Really? That's
he,
quite wow.
he once owned it and
Wow.
then sold it for a terrible loss during the market crash, I think in 2008 or whatever. And
Really?
I wish I knew the details, but I was so, it was a sort of conversation where he said, "So what are you working on?" I said, "Well, I've been reading a lot of John Ruskin recently." And then he told me this story about, and he knew exactly who John Ruskin was and about the Whistler, and he owned the painting.
Wow.
No,
James, huh?
small world.
James.
My road, and you haven't seen my road. It's a dead end dirt road in the middle of nowhere.
And where did James live, or where was he from?
He's from New York, but he lives
New
in
York City?
Vermont now. New York City, yeah.
Not James Corcoran, not James McKinnon. Anyway,
You're looking it up, yeah.
yeah, fascinating.
It's interesting that, Mark, that one of the things, especially in later life, that Ruskin did every day was translate Plato. It's kind of his morning intellectual exercise was to translate the laws.
Was this at Brentwood?
Yep, at Brentwood.
Yeah, I think I've read that too. And I think Collingwood and Wedderburn went up there, and they did their translating, kind of staying with him while they were rebuilding the dock or something.
That's right.
There was some sort of like, it was like a salon at Brentwood.
Yes.
Translating Plato and Xenophon.
Yeah, and Xenophon. I don't think, it's not my impression that he ever finished it.
I don't think he did, from what I've been able to find.
But what's significant in support of your very rich thesis on the classical roots of Unto This Last is that this was a daily part of his intellectual life, was translating Plato.
Yeah.
Well, Gabe, if there are no more questions, do you want to wrap things up?
I want to make sure that nobody else wanted to bring up something. Okay, well, this was, Mark, as I knew it would be, this is a very rich meal that you've spread out for us. I think one of the things that has interested me, particularly in the last couple of years, is not only reading Ruskin, but also reading his sources. And it just makes Ruskin richer, to see him in dialogue with his sources. And what's so marvelous about Ruskin is when Ruskin quotes these things, often, as in all quotes, they're brief, passing references to something. But that's not what he's doing. One has to go back and read the source in its context to really understand how rich this dialogue really is.
In that sense, a reader like Ruskin, a quote is just in our language, a hyperlink to the whole window. It opens the whole window, which is that ancient world and all the connections that are there. So yeah, the deep reading that he practiced and just the prodigious memory that he had as well. I think you're right. It's not just one-off quote to make it look nice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I like that phrase, deep reading, because that's what it is. It's this, it's this dialogue between the sources and your own reflections. It's so profound. Excellent. Well, this Mark's presentation will be shortly up on our YouTube channel for all of our many subscribers to access. Again, just a comment about the book yesterday?
Day before.
Nature's Lead, Ancient Ways of Living in a Dying World, from Princeton. I think, Katrina, you put into the chat the code. So there's a special code.
I placed it in again, just in case anyone missed it.
Oh, very good. So we've got a special code which gives our readers and people in our circle a generous discount on the book, 30% discount. So be sure and avail yourself of that as well as the book itself. I think you can see from this excerpt from it that there's a very rich and engaging experience to be had from this. So Mark, again, thank you so much for agreeing to speak to us.
Yep, thank you.
Yeah.
Speaking of Mark, in our upcoming newsletter that we're putting together now, he has graced us with a republication of an essay called "Fire Sermons: Seneca and Thoreau on Climate Trauma," and it certainly has a particular relevance to us here in Los Angeles in the post-fire era. So we will be republishing that essay in our next newsletter. In terms of upcoming events, on Saturday we have our usual study sessions from 10 to 11:30. As Tyson mentioned earlier, we are sort of threading our way through Ruskin's The Stones of Venice this year. We just finished volume 1, and we're now off into volume 2. So we'll be taking a look at chapter 1, volume 2 on the throne this Saturday. So be sure and join us. You can access the link to the Zoom link on the website. Not only that, but not only information, but also our PDFs of the library edition of Ruskin's work. So we have all 39 volumes in PDFs on the resources tab, so that we can all be reading off the same pages. We are also joined in these study sessions often by people from the Fours Center in Venice. So they're at the end of the day, we're at the beginning of our day, but together, and especially having people from the Fours Center, the Ruskin Center in Venice, is such a great boon. In June, next month, on Thursday, June 19th at 5 p.m., our own Stuart Denenberg will be speaking about Evelyn Pickering de Morgan's Cupidity and Blindness, Chasing Joy from the City, an extraordinary 1897 work that he has recently purchased, and he'll be talking about other Ruskin-related treasures that will come along with that. So that's on June 19th. That will shortly be up on the website. So there's more to come. The study sessions will continue all this summer, so join us for these these sessions. It's great fun on Saturday morning. It doesn't require any prior knowledge of or experience with Ruskin. So we're all learning. So be sure and join us for these sessions. And again, Mark, thank you so much for being with us tonight.
Exactly. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night.
Bye. Good night.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Good night. Thank you, everyone.
Katrina, thank you.